be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. First thing I kind of want to dive into is kind of get into the economy here. And, you know, we've kind of seen a lot of the overshadowing of this. And, of course, we got the debates and everything. I want to go ahead and get into this Ron Paul, and it fades out. Okay. Now, today we're going to actually start off with getting into the Hillary Clinton Benghazi questioning, which, you know, looking at what happened in Benghazi, look at everything really that's happened in the administration as a whole. For people to trust or, you know, actually go along with people like Hillary Clinton, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obama, all of these factions of authoritarians, they're either brain dead or they think that when these people are talking about, you know, equality and having as much as the next person, they're not talking about you. They're talking about themselves and looking at the global elite. They want to be a part of the global elite. They want to be equal to everyone else. It really doesn't come down to being equal for you. They need more control over society to accomplish their goals that they themselves come out and talk about. We'll give you this, we'll give you that. They forget to tell you that, well, even Bernie Sanders doesn't forget to tell you. He says he's going to raise taxes on everyone to pay for things that we never agreed to pay for a debt that is not ours. With Benghazi, I think one thing that should be pointed out, people are like, well, it doesn't really matter why they did. If it doesn't matter, why did they lie about it when they knew the truth about it for so long? You don't just lie about it for no reason. We're going to start off here with the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Benghazi questions no one dares ask. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
the information provided to me.
There was another particular piece that was talked about after the IED attack that AFRICOM
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
As our viewers have noticed that we're doing this program at the same time, there's very important hearings going on in Washington dealing with Hillary Clinton and Benghazi. And I guess the first question for a lot of American people, do you think we're going to learn something new today? Do you have any predictions and any shattering news that will come out of this hearing?
Well, I think, as you've said many times before, it's kind of a political farce on both sides. So there'll be a lot of posturing, but not a lot of truth coming out.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's going to be the case, because I don't think they're going to deal with the real issue, and that is, why were we there? And there's a very good point made about these hearings are ongoing, and they've been going on for a couple years. A lot of email and a lot of effort and time. And the committee, the Republican-run committee, has spent $4 million. And I got to thinking, the Democrats are making a deal with it. Maybe a miracle's going to happen. These hearings are going to turn the Democrats into fiscal conservatives because they're outraged that $4 million was being spent, on this. But, in a way, wouldn't there be an argument for saying, investigations and spending the taxpayers' money on investigating our government to find out what they're doing wrong would be legitimate? That doesn't mean that spending the money and having commissions ever accomplishes very much, but I think in theory, investigations would be worthwhile if we had honest people there. But unfortunately, when you get honest whistleblowers in, we don't seem to get to hear from them.
Yeah, and they're having a fit over $4 million spent, but they didn't care at all about $500 million authorized to train rebels in Syria, which turned Syria into the exact same situation that Libya is in. So when it comes to $500 million, that's okay.
Yeah, but what about the point now of all these hearings and this excitement? Let's get to the bottom of this. What does evil Hillary do? And they really want to get to the bottom of it, where they forgot all about it when we went to war. Did they have hearings? Did the Republicans demand, let's have hearings? What's this administration doing? Are they getting us involved in another war in Libya? There were no hearings, but President, the peace candidate, said, well, the United Nations gave us authority. I think that is a real distortion of what our government ought to be doing.
And if you remember correctly, Representative Kucinich, along with yourself, and I believe Walter Jones and a few others, tried to push through a resolution through Congress, at least trying to get a vote on something about Libya, stop the war without a further authorization. They quashed it. They didn't even allow a vote. They were uninterested.
The big question is who's going to benefit politically? I think Hillary, because she's smart and she has a good presence and she'll do a good job here, and she's been doing better with presenting herself in the campaign. She may come out doing pretty well in this. But I think that's all politics. It's Republicans against Democrats, and they make a really big deal of it. But I believe this is a distraction. For my sake, the most important issue is, why are we there, and why didn't they really talk about this before? And why is it that on an issue where there's bipartisan agreement, almost universal. How many anti-war votes would we get when people even went to the Congress to get a vote? And how many people came to help us try to get exposure of this before they went to war? There's none of it. So there's a universal unanimity with the Republicans and Democrats, and it looks like the neocons are going to win this. It looks like Dick Cheney's going to win, and it looks like Bill Kristol will win, because they love this kind of stuff, even though they have to pretend so the American people think there's really a difference, whether it's Republicans or Democrats on who gets in, and yet policies never change. That is what I don't believe they're going to hear. These hearings ongoing right now, and they'll probably go on for a couple more hours. I don't think we'll get to the nitty-gritty of this pretense that there's a real debate going on. Matter of fact, I've followed Hillary and the Democrats for a while, but just reviewing and looking at some of her current statements, even as the conclusion of Benghazi. But boy, she is adamant. She is really hawkish, and that really is scary because she used to be, at least people thought, and I have to be guilty of a little bit of hope with our current president that he would be less militant. But there's no reason to hope that Hillary will present a more sensible foreign policy.
Well, you're correct that she has a tremendous presence. She's extremely smart. She presents herself very well. But what the committee won't address, because as you pointed out, they all agree, but what they won't address is her startling incompetence when it comes to handling the Libya invasion. She was the one, along with Samantha Power and Susan Rice, who pushed Obama the strongest into this. Although, as Bob Gates, who was in the administration at the time, pointed out, they had absolutely no idea what would happen after they got rid of Gaddafi. The quote that Gates said is, quote, "We played it by ear." So talk about stunning incompetence. To this day, she says, Libya was smart power at its best. Well, if that's smart power...
Well, that's sad. It's sad for the American people. It's sad for the people who die. And it's sad for the consequence of this. The consequence of pushing us into this deal has been horrendous. And, of course, we spoke about this rather recently, where all the weapons have flowed out of Syria, out of Libya into Syria and to Africa and all these places. So, you don't know whether this is definitely planned and they're doing a good job and they're efficient in accomplishing what they want, or it's unintended consequences or whatever. But so a lot of bad things have happened from this, and I don't think they're going to really touch on that in this hearing.
Well, Benghazi was the center of the revolution against Gaddafi. So you'd think that those people in that area would have been the most pro-American. The question is, and I think even Rand asked it a while ago, what was actually happening at the consulate? What was the U.S. doing in Benghazi? We know that weapons were being shipped out. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's been well proven that weapons have been shipped out. What else was happening there? What were the real issues that were happening around that consulate at the time? That's what I'd like to know.
And it's going to be hard for us to even speculate because there's so many different factions. If you try to figure out who did what or who's doing what in Syria right now, there are so many different factions. There might be 6 or 8 factions, and this would be true in Syria as well. So we won't know the exact group. All I know is there could have been a lot better outcome if we had practiced prevention, and just avoided this situation. But politics plays a major part in this, and I think the big setback for the Republicans, of course, was Kevin McCarthy blurting out the truth. Oh, that's horrible. You're not supposed to do that. Yeah, we did this, and we really got Hillary on that. This really destroyed their credibility. But it should destroy their credibility, but it should have been destroyed before that. And this is the whole thing is that, you're not supposed to speak the truth. I guess that's what they call a gaffe when you voluntarily blurt out the truth and it backfires on you. But, and the Democrats caught hold of this. But didn't the Republicans do a pretty good job when they got wind of what Lois Lerner was doing with the IRS? I mean, oh no. They argue, and they still argue, even though she lost her job. Fortunately, something good came of that. But she wasn't targeting conservative libertarian groups, and this was not political. But and I think, what we're talking about here, we don't have a consensus on everything, but I think this is what disgusts the American people. There's so many lies and fibs and distortions and collusion, and I've frequently said that one reason why there's a small group of Republicans now that are sick and tired of it all, and that there was no difference between Boehner and Pelosi. And there's certainly, in this incident of going in, there wasn't. But then the question comes up, well, why are they fussing and fuming? Why don't they help cover up? But I think there probably are some reasons why the political charade continues.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we focus on at the Institute, Peace and Prosperity, is not just to be anti-war, but to study the things that lead to wars. And the thing about Libya that's fascinating is this whole UN Security Council resolution came about because of one Libyan NGO, and there was a fantastic film made about this guy. It was a one-man operation, and he essentially admitted on film that he made up all of the atrocity stories about Libya. But it was based on his NGO report that the Human Rights Council of the UN kicked it upstairs to the UN Security Council, which passed a resolution based on false information, which became the authorization for the use of force. So you have to trace these things back to their origin, and it's often very fascinating to do so.
Yes, in the early part of Hillary's statement today, and I don't have the quote, but the way I understood it was that she said that, the responsibility of she and others would be security. People love security and safety, and they're willing to give up their liberties for it. So she knew she honed in on security, and that's what she was dealing with. And she wanted to downplay and dispose of those people who are locked into ideology. And I got to thinking, I have an ideology, in just about everything I want to do, there is. But she is still spouting an ideology. It's not like we're practical and this is the whole purpose of utilitarianism. They're practical people, but they're ideologues too. They're ideologues that play on this whole thing of humanitarianism. Matter of fact, Hillary has pushed this whole war on humanitarianism. It was to go in there and things are going to be very practical. But the whole system of government that we have today, especially interventionism, whether it's economic or foreign policy, is utilitarianism. That is a philosophy in itself. But anybody who would say, well, our philosophy is the Constitution of non-intervention, we ought to mind our own business and provide a national defense and have a sound money. Oh, you're a bunch of ideologues. You're locked into this ideology. And matter of fact, the few that are talking ideology in Congress right now, they're the bad guys because they won't compromise with the people. The rest of them are arguing, really, the truth is more money. In this case, they don't want anything. Neither party wants to do anything. They'll probably use this as saying, we do have problems and we need a little bit more money. And they always do, whether it's out in the open or a secret budget.
One of the things Hillary Clinton is known for is militarization of the State Department. She really did turn it, part of the State Department, into sort of a paramilitary organization. And I remember when you were questioning her, as you know, she's very, very good when she's a witness. But she agreed with you when you talked about we need more diplomacy. She knew how to handle what you were saying, but her solution was, well, that's why we need a bigger State Department budget, without really letting us know. But a lot of that new money was used to really militarize a lot of the functions of the department. But she's very good.
When an incident like this happens, I always think, does this fall into the category of blowback? And it may well be blowback against American interference. And like we said, we don't know exactly who did it. But and sometimes blowback and unintended consequence sort of blend in together. So either way, it was an episode that nobody's bragging about and thought it was good. Quite frankly, the people who were totally inept, even the ones who wanted our troops over there, I don't think any of them deliberately said, well, let's sacrifice 4 Americans, because they're going to be serving our cause. I don't think there's any of that. I think it's stupidity and bad ideology that did that. It's their ideology that we have to challenge. And all they're doing here is challenge of management of the ideology, and both sides endorse the same ideology. And they say, well, we can manage things better. We would have protected the embassy in Benghazi, and we would have done this, or we'd have used more troops here. And it's always an argument of a technical argument. And I think the argument has to be ideological if we're ever to, see a change.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and you're right, this will not come up at all.
No, unfortunately, that isn't the case, but I am pretty determined that ideology plays a role, because ideas have consequences, and if you have the correct ideas, ideas will spread, and they cannot be defeated by armies or bad politicians in Washington. Right now, I see progress in the peace movement, whether it's an election in Canada, or whether when the people speak out in Great Britain, or the people speak out here in this country, because ideology does play a role in it. And I think we are winning on these issues. I think ideologically we're winning on the Federal Reserve issue, because more people know now the Federal Reserve is totally inept. And when the crunch really comes, they can put the blame where it deserves, right on the Federal Reserve. And when the poor people become so numerous they can't ignore them, and when the middle class is gone, maybe they'll wake up and say the answer isn't to elect a socialist. Maybe it's to think about the ideology of personal liberty and allowing people the freedom to take care of themselves and get the government out of the way. Under those circumstances, we can be very hopeful. We're moving in that direction, but unfortunately, these hearings will just emphasize the fact that they're dealing with a technical problem. There's a pretense that the Republicans would run things better than Democrats and vice versa, but that's just sort of to cover their tracks because they both endorsed and supported and did nothing to try to stop our intervention in Libya. And now, since that time, we have had the expansion of this philosophy into Syria and all over the Middle East. But even there, I see signs of it ending. The end is coming. We're living in a new era. The foreign policy is failing. The monetary policy is failure. The economic policy is failing. So there's room for the right answers, and that is the correct ideology. And fortunately, it's available now like it's never been available before. Probably there's a greater emphasis and understanding of the ideas of liberty than any time in our history. So our job is to spread this message and convince the majority of the American people and the majority of the people around the world that liberty provides the answer and not authoritarianism. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Now, I think one question that should be asked, not just about Benghazi, about Hillary Clinton, about the whole administration, about none of these people being truly held accountable. You know, they kind of talked a little bit about what came out about Lois Lerner and not targeting conservatives or libertarians. Never, or Tea Partyists. But then we look back at Reagan, or not Reagan, but Nixon. We look back in history at Nixon, and we look at the whole Lois Lerner thing, we have a difference, a big difference. One was threatened with impeachment and all this, and the other one, oh, you're okay. We don't have any accountability at all, not even a theater of accountability, because this isn't even this whole hearings. It's nothing more than a show, because it really doesn't have any type of really legitimacy to it. And again, I think Ron Paul accurately kind of hit that one on the nail when he says, because both sides are complicit in this type of stuff. They're doing it for political reasons. Now, the FBI investigation, more than likely, is not a political one, but the hearings are. And it's a pretty evident that it really is a show. I have one here out of Breitbart.com that they kind of showed it. It says, watch, Hillary bursts out laughing during Benghazi hearing. And it says here, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton bursts out laughing when asked if she was alone the whole time at her house on the night of September 11, 2012. During her testimony before the Benghazi Select Committee on Thursday, Hillary was asked by Representative Martha Roby, a Republican Alabama, whether she was alone at her house on the night of the attacks. Hillary answered that she was, after Roby asked if she was alone the whole night. Hillary began laughing after stating, well, yes, the whole night. Roby said, I don't know why that's funny. I don't find it funny at all. Hillary said, I'm sorry, a little note of Levitivity at 7:15. Let me go ahead and play this little clip here. Let me make sure the volume is adjusted too. This might take a second. Being Breitbart, it tends to.
Made then. You wrote in your book, Hard Choices, that you were directing the State Department response the night of September 11th, 2012, but you also stated that you left your office on the night of the attacks and went to your home in Northwest Washington because you said you knew the next few days were going to be taxing and the department was going to be looking to you. I want to talk about a few things. Do you have a skiff in your home?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and who else was at your home? Were you alone?
I was alone, yes.
The whole night?
Well, yes, the whole night.
Well, I don't know why that's funny. I mean, did you have any in-person briefings? I don't find it funny at all.
I'm sorry, a little note of levity at 7:15.
Well, I mean, the reason I say it's not funny is because it went well into the night when our folks on the ground were still in danger. So I don't think it's funny to ask if you were alone the whole night.
Congresswoman, you asked if I had a skiff. I had secure phones. I had other.
Okay, and what's kind of weird is there's people that have already put clips together that I've seen floating around where anytime she blows off anything serious, it's that same exact evil laugh. And it's just pretty odd. And it really, there might be representatives there that are truly interested in the truth. They have serious questions, and Miss Roby might as well be truly trying to dig into the truth and take it seriously. But even if a few of them are serious, I think that her reactions, Hillary's reactions, kind of show that there is a certain ease to it, to the point where it suggests that nothing's going to come from this. Now, it could be just her being naive to the fact, but I think we probably should look more towards the FBI investigation to see what that turns up. And next, I want to get into another presidential candidate, Rubio. I have one here from Truth and Media, and this is Ben Swan Reality Check. Mark Rubio finally shows up for work to say people who don't should be fired. And you can also find it. It's Reality Check. Should Rubio be fired for terrible voting record? So let's go ahead and cue this up here. Okay, here we go.
Well, 2016 presidential candidate Marco Rubio said just one day ago that if government employees are not doing their jobs, they should be fired. I think we can all agree, but that might mean that Rubio should be among those getting canned. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else.
All we're saying in this bill is if you work at the VA and you aren't doing your job, they get to fire you. I think people are shocked that that doesn't actually exist in the entire government, since there is really no other job in the country where if you don't do your job, you don't get fired.
Well, Florida Senator Marco Rubio making a lot of sense there just a day ago on the floor of the Senate. The only problem, when he says that people in government should be fired if they don't do their jobs, he's probably not talking about himself, but should he be? Remember when Donald Trump tweeted this? Rubio is totally owned by the lobbyists and special interests, a lightweight senator with the worst voting record in the Senate. Lazy. Now, being a senator is more than just voting, so we're not going to call him lazy, but does he have one of the worst voting records? Well, yes, Trump is right. Senator Rubio, who is still just a freshman senator, has one of the worst records in the Senate. How bad is it? Well, according to GovTrack, from January 2011 to October of 2015, Marco Rubio has missed 165 of the 1,423 roll call votes, which is 11.6%. This is much worse than the median of 1.6% among the lifetime records of senators who are currently serving. But as the year has gone on, Rubio's record is getting worse. This month, he's missed 87% of the votes cast. In fact, this speech about government employees, it's the only vote that he has been present for this month. In fact, just weeks ago on CNBC, Rubio defended missing all those votes, saying, quote, "I'm going to miss votes. I'm running for president," end quote. And that is true, but Senator, you weren't elected to run for president. You were elected to help govern. And by the way, there are 4 other senators who are also running for president this election cycle: Rand Paul, Bernie Sanders, Ted Cruz, and Lindsey Graham. And all of them, according to PolitiFact, have better voting records this year than Rubio. According to those numbers, Marco Rubio has missed 29.1% of his votes between January 1st and September 16th of this year. During that same period, Ted Cruz was absent for 23.4%, Lindsey Graham 22.6%, none of which are good numbers. But look at Bernie Sanders. He's missed only 3.4%, and the best voting record, Rand Paul, who's missed only 4 votes, or 1.5%. So what you need to know about Marco Rubio's voting record, not only is it terrible, not only has he missed almost 30% of the votes that he was supposed to be present for this year, but his excuse that he missed those votes because he's running for president. And that doesn't hold water. Why? Because almost 30%, or 1/3 of all of his missed votes in 2015 were missed before he announced he was running for president. And according to the Washington Post, even after announcing, on 15 of the 34 days that he missed votes since his campaign began, it's not clear what Rubio was doing for his campaign because he wasn't at a public event. Yes, Senator, you are correct. Washington is the only place where people can simply not do their jobs and have no fear of losing them. Too bad voters have forgotten that they have the power to change that when it comes to those who are elected to serve. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
Ben Swan, Reality Check. Ben Swan on YouTube, truthandmedia.com. Subscribe, check out the website, get their email. Don't forget to check out Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube and RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Now, we look at that statistics. Let me try to bring it back up here. And these are the voting records. Again, it's Rubio has missed 77 votes. Cruz has missed 62 votes. Graham has missed 60. Sanders 9. And Rand Paul 4. And we've seen articles, Rand Paul's campaign is already dead. And many of the listeners that may not be newer know that I don't trust Rand Paul, but I definitely would say he's the lesser of the evils up there. Um, I think our system is just so flawed that if there's any way to start reversing it, I think Rand Paul would be that start. But I think it's a totally uphill battle. And I don't think there's enough people out there awake enough to accomplish that. Definitely when we see people like Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump might not be sincere. I'm saying that I don't trust him for one reason. I think he is authoritarian. And when people say, well, look, he can't be bought. He doesn't want the PAC money. He doesn't want none of this. No, because if he gets that position, he's set. Let's just put it that way. He's set. He can financially gain from that position. We look at politics, and when you look at these people that come in, what their salary for that job is, and we see the wealth that comes from it, he's already shown that he can sustain a pretty good amount of wealth. People are like, oh, he went bankrupt. His businesses went bankrupt. He's never went bankrupt. His businesses have, and we know that's again another loophole that a lot of these companies use. You know, too big to fail type things. It's a way to get rid of debt, basically, for these companies in a efficient manner, as some of them would say. Rand Paul, there is another article here I wanted to pull up. If I can find it. Maybe. Okay, here's one. And of course this is from Youth for Rand Paul. I want to say there was one on Rare. Let me see. I can do that real quick. Give me a second. Trying to navigate Rare. I'm not really a big fan of Rare when it comes to trying to find stuff on here. Let me use their little search box here. I think I found it here. Maybe. Okay. I'm still trying to find it here because their search things are just all screwed. Let me try this. Here it is. It was 3 days ago. That's why I was having a hard time finding it. This one turns out Rand Paul's dead candidacy isn't so dead after all. And this was Corey W. Stevens that posted it. Says here, a CNN poll released on Monday placed Rand Paul back in the top 5 Republican presidential candidates. Paul is tied for 5th place with Mike Huckabee at 5%, while Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, I don't know. Chris Christie lagged behind him at 4%. Trump and Carson still lead the field with 27 and 22% respectively. This comes in the wake of yet another hit piece out about the libertarian moment that wasn't, published by Politico's Michael Lind. Lind wonders whether Paul's poll numbers will even qualify him for the next debate on the very same day that a major poll shows him ahead of most of the field. Politico is the same publication that invented, of course, pop up. No, I don't want to subscribe. Invented the Cruz is stealing Paul's voters thesis based on sparse bits of anecdotal evidence, such as one former Ron Paul voter telling a reporter at the Republican Liberty Caucus National Convention that she prefers Ted Cruz to Rand Paul. The Republican field is still dominated by perceived outsiders, Trump and Carson, but that doesn't mean either of them has what it takes to actually win. Polling that drills down into who Trump's supporters are has constantly shown them to be disinfected independents and moderates, not exactly the type of people one expects to show up at a caucus or knock on doors for their candidate. And Carson has embarked upon a book tour rather than an actual campaign. Rand Paul, on the other hand, has a built-in advantage with a strong and youthful ground game. There are several hundred students for Rand Paul organizations across the country. His campaign has hired well-placed field directors, and the concerned voters for America's Super PAC supporting Paul isn't simply running TV ads. They're hitting the pavement, persuading people with a strong history of participating in Republican caucuses and primaries to support Paul. Whether Paul or any other candidate, for that matter, will be able to break through the Trump and Carson noise remains an open question. What's abundantly clear, however, is that Paul's campaign is no more dead than Cruz's, Fiorina's, Christie's, or Kasich. Standard Beltway media narratives notwithstanding. And I only think that Rand Paul is the closest to libertarian. He is not libertarian at all. He has libertarian views on many things. And the thing is, you meet libertarians all the time that you disagree on things. Why do you disagree? We're not all the same. That's the point of being a libertarian. And if you're also a realist libertarian, you look at society and you understand that the options that lay beneath the populace in times that we're in, and we can see it through history, different events that have happened and results that come from it. And you can see a society that decides to make change, uncomfortable change, but the change that allows people to become free and prosper. But that change, if you do it in the system that we have now, it's a long uproad battle. Well, I think there are some libertarians, and I'm not going to say even the majority, because I do think it's a small group that prefer the other way. And it's a violent revolution because they're never going to give us our freedom back. Well, it's not about giving us our freedom back. It's about us using our brains to take it back without the use of force. And if we stop buying into the infighting, the divide and conquer, I think more of us could realize how easy it is. There was a video I've seen of a lady intervening in cops already having a lady in handcuffs, sitting there twisting her arm and kind of like shoving her on the ground and really just going beyond what they needed to do. They had this, and she wasn't a big lady, and she wasn't sitting there like trying to fight him or nothing, just kind of getting shoved around. And a lady pulled out her camera and intervened, said, this is not right. You got her in handcuffs. You got to do what you got to do, but you're not going to sit there and abuse people. And they're trying to, I'm not going nowhere. Listen, this crap's got to stop. Well, we also seen where people have stood up. And when we see this happen, we tend to see results come from it. But the also the mindset from these people is, I'm also not going to be a victim. Now, we also have seen movements where they try to play the victim. They put themselves in a situation, not going into it, not willing to even defend themselves. So you kind of put yourself where they're like, stop. And you're basically just butting up against them, knowing that they're going to push back, and you're just going to kind of, in a way, push back, but not with any force. More just provocateering. And when you see that being played upon law enforcement, then you wonder why they kind of get abusive in situations. It's because there's factions out there that are training each side to get violent against each other. And it's happening in a lot of protests. When you become aware of these things, they stop affecting you the way they might affect people that are still kind of brainwashed to the system. I kind of just want to kind of get off topic just because we play a serious note quite a bit. This one out of the Libertarian Republic. It's just something I came across. 5 things Star Wars The Force Awakens should learn from the prequels. Monday was a huge event for every Star Wars fan in the modern world, as had been rumored the entire week prior. Monday Night Football on ESPN was the host of the premiere of the final and indeed first full-fledged trailer for Star Wars The Force Awakens. thank goodness they finally stopped with the episode numbering in the official titles. It was, by all accounts, breathtakingly great to watch. If you haven't seen it already, first climb out of that under the rock you've been inhabiting, dust yourself off, and then enjoy the eye candy below. For all intents and purposes, this is setting out to be a great film. Already we can see the ideal mix of familiar visuals and ultra-modern filmmaking flourish. Something to breathe new life into what had become a tired old visage of something greater that was long gone. Now we have an actual fan of the original Star Wars story at the helm, and all signs point to up. But what if we had to place the aforementioned criteria for greatness on a list of do's and do nots? What would be our barometer? I submit the following base the guideposts for this new first and forthcoming trilogy of the last Star Wars film to hold that same honor, The Phantom Menace in 1999. Here's a twist, though. I see nothing but list after list containing all the things Episode 1 did wrong, and therefore The Force Awakens should avoid. So why don't we build a different list, one containing all the things the film did right and worth emulating? What I mean is, let us turn from the dark side and awaken the light, because whether some want to admit it or not, there were actually a lot of really good aspects of The Phantom Menace. I know, the Star Wars prequel trilogy was horrible, objectively speaking, simply from the perspective of a series fan of the film. I'm not one to disagree. For the most part, the pacing was uneven, the plot full of holes, character development abysmal, dialogue unrealistic, the cinematography flat, the special effects overbearing, the list goes on and on. However, the first film in that trilogy is still my personal favorite, an unpopular opinion for sure, but one not unfounded. As I hope to explain in the following points, Episode 1 still served as a fitting opening act for what could have turned out to be a fine little trilogy of decently entertaining Star Wars films, albeit not from the same greatness as the originals. Had George Lucas emulated his previous tradition of handling all the creative duties for the first outing, but then handing over the reins to more capable filmmakers for the sequels, that could have happened. Instead, what we got was an unimaginated mess that, in my opinion, only got worse with each installment. But enough about the dark times. Let's try to... Okay, number 5, the Jedi Order. The fact that the Jedi depicted in the original trilogy were nothing more than nomadic remnants of a much more sophisticated hierarchy was an intentional narrative move. It built mystery and intrigue around these guys. Eccentric space wizards like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda never have worked as written on paper, and yet the way they were presented on the screen gave us glimpses into a very high-minded, regal, philosophical order full of magic and wonder that made pine for more. Let's go ahead and stop there, but because this goes on pretty good, and go check it out at the Libertarian Republic, because when you actually look at some of the things in some of these movies, you wonder if people are warning or trying to show, oh, this will turn you bad, because there is so much propaganda. When, you want to teach your kids things, and these are, things that we watch for entertainment or whatnot. You want to be able to explain problems. That way they're not going, they look at certain people as heroes and they go, oh, they decided to be independent and they turned evil because they weren't a part of the group anymore. They went against what the group wanted to do, even though that action normally wouldn't have hurt anyone. Somehow they work it into the storyline that it will hurt someone. We see this in a lot of movies, and we have to be careful too when we look at these movies. And we also kind of have to be relaxed. If you educate yourself, you educate other people enough, and educate your children, you're not going to have to worry so much about the propaganda affecting them in a negative way, making them these conformists. Okay. Give me a second here. We are going to go ahead and get into another one here. Give me a second. Now, when we try to expose things, it's one thing. But when we have these people that, there's people in government that are aware that things they see are wrong. Things that they're told to do are wrong. And they want to speak out. And then, government comes out and goes, oh, we're going to protect whistleblowers. And you blow the whistle and you try to do it the correct way where, you go to the higher ups, the people above them, when they fire you or they shut you up. Blowing the whistle becomes a dangerous act. And I think one thing that proves that is Edward Snowden. It's scary for these people that want to, blow the whistle. And a lot of times, the only stuff that we get are things that enough people have access to in government that it's easier for them to leak, which means that even if it's classified, it's not a huge secret. It's just not supposed to be public, and once it gets out to enough people and it gets leaked, by then they might have even moved on. But I think that Edward Snowden, one thing that did is it just it was at a point where, alternative media, of course, Alex Jones, InfoWars, big alternative media outlet, people consider conspiracy theories, but we know that, we're all called conspiracy theorists if we try to speak the truth. We look at all this, and it's war on everyone that tries to leak any type of information. And what we've seen with Edward Snowden is, he had to leave the country. He had to give up his life, his cozy paycheck, just to allow people to know the truth. And it's stuff that, InfoWars Alternative Media was reporting on and called conspiracy theorists. And that's one thing, it was at the height of that. You're conspiracy theorists thinking that government can watch what you're watching on your computer screen, or they can see in real time. Oh, okay, yeah, we do, collect data, but it's all metadata. Oh, Edward, well, we don't ever use that option, even though it's there. It's just BS and BS, but then, we have politicians saying that, he should be tried for treason and all this. Well, when are the politicians that allowed this to happen, that allowed these agencies to run rogue? Someone's supposed to be in charge, and you're either incompetent, and because you took a position and you couldn't hold it, and you allowed the agencies to run rogue, or you ordered them to do these things. Either way, why are you not being tried? But they want to, off with this guy's head for telling people what some of us already knew, but validating it. But I have one here from Reason. And this one's, give me a second, Edward Snowden's lawyer on the government's war on whistleblowers.
For all the people out there shouting that Edward Snowden should have gone through the proper channels, Tom Drake and Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, and Ed Loomis did go through the proper channels, and all of them fell under criminal investigation for having done so.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Jesselyn Radak. She's a lawyer who has represented many whistleblowers, such as John Kiriakou, Thomas Drake, and Edward Snowden. She's a whistleblower herself as well, and she's now the National Security and Human Rights Director at Exposed Facts. Jesselyn, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's work through some of your kind of greatest hits, and then we'll talk about larger issues related to surveillance and the security state. You used to work at the Department of Justice during the prosecution of John Walker Lindh, the American Taliban, from, a dozen years ago almost now. What happened in that case, and how did that change your entire framework of thinking about government accountability?
I was the ethics attorney for the Justice Department, despite giving advice not to interrogate the so-called American Taliban without his lawyer, and also not to torture him. It was clear the U.S. was doing both. And then I advised not to use that information in a criminal prosecution. I was informed unambiguously that he had counsel. And because of that, like with any American, I would say if he has counsel, you need to allow him his attorney for any kind of custodial interrogation. That was on a Friday, and the Justice Department office that I was dealing with called back on Monday and said, well, the FBI interrogated him anyway. What do we do now? I said, well, you can use that information for national security and intelligence gathering, but not for criminal prosecution because it was an improper interrogation without counsel.
And then when the criminal prosecution came up, all of your emails on this went missing from the official record.
That's correct. There was a department-wide discovery order for all Justice Department correspondence dealing with John Walker Lynn's interrogation. The prosecutor had 2 of mine, but I had written more than a dozen that were reflected pretty badly on the FBI. And I went to check the file. Back then we kept hard copies of things, and they were not in the file. I resurrected them from my computer archives and wrote a memo to my boss and attached them and resigned. I said, I'm not going to be a part of whatever is going on.
What had brought you to the Department of Justice?
That was my career ambition, was to be a lifelong public servant. But then when it got completely politicized, in my case, after 9/11, to the point that we were looking the other way, when there are pictures, trophy photos going around the world of an American being tortured by our people, it really caused a crisis of conscience for me.
Let's talk about torture for a second, because one of the people you did represent was John Kiriakou, who brought torture to the forefront. What did he do and what happened to him?
John Kiriakou was the first CIA agent to actually publicly confirm that torture was an official United States program, that we were waterboarding people, and said unequivocally torture is wrong and we shouldn't be in the business of doing it. During the subsequent years after that interview, the CIA filed 6 crimes reports on Kiriakou, trying to get the Justice Department to prosecute him. And it wasn't until the Obama administration opened a war on whistleblowers using the Espionage Act that he was, in fact, prosecuted on a couple of counts of espionage and 2 of violating the Intelligence Identity Protection Act. Like a number of Espionage Act defendants, he didn't actually plead guilty to committing espionage.
What did he end up getting as a sentence?
John ended up getting 30 months in jail and served 2.5 years in jail, and part of that under house arrest, and now he's on probation. But really, this is one of the smartest people I've ever met, speaks multiple languages, including ones we need right now for people in government service, like Arabic. And he will never work in the government again, though he remains staunchly patriotic. I mean, most of the people that I represent have spent their entire adult lives serving in the military or working for the government. They are true believers, and I think they still do believe that this can be fixed, or they wouldn't have blown the whistle and they wouldn't continue to speak out. They feel like we're not at the point of no return, that there still can be some sort of pullback on this.
Well, that describes in many ways Thomas Drake, one of your clients, who, along with people like William Binney and Kirk Wiebe, went through the official or they went through what channels seemed to be official at the time. Drake was an NSA whistleblower who talked about warrantless wiretapping. What happened to him?
Thomas Drake went through every conceivable internal channel about a number of surveillance programs. He was talking mostly one called Trailblazer, but he went to his boss. He went to the NSA General Counsel. He went to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees and testified in 2 9/11 inquiries. And not only did they fail to redress his concern, they turned around and prosecuted him for espionage. So for all the people out there shouting that Edward Snowden should have gone through the proper channels, first of all, there are not that many channels for national security and intelligence whistleblowers. They are excluded from most avenues available to other whistleblowers. But second of all, Tom Drake and Bill Binney, Kirk Wiebe, and Ed Loomis did go through the proper channels, and all of them fell under criminal investigation for having done so.
Let's talk about Snowden, your most famous client, who recently joined Twitter and almost immediately got over 1 million followers. What is different about Snowden, the appeal that he seems to have to a wide range of people who otherwise look askance at whistleblowers?
I think with Snowden, there are a number of differences. First of all, he has publicly said that he studied the cases of Tom Drake and Bill Binney and how they had gone through proper channels and how they got completely lambasted and skewered for doing that, and made his decision differently to go directly to reporters, give the information to reporters, and let them use their editorial judgment about what was in the public interest to know. He also had what a lot of whistleblowers don't have, which is documentary evidence. That's very hard to obtain or actually remove from an agency. He's young. He appeals to many different communities. He appeals to a very youthful activist community. He appeals to civil libertarians. He appeals to progressive Democrats. He has broad cross-section appeal. He's incredibly articulate, and he doesn't want to be the center of attention. Now, that's a problem for every whistleblower. They want to shoot the messenger rather than listen to the message.
What is the likely disposition of his case over the coming 10 years or so? Will he ever be able to come back to the United States in anything other than chains?
I think he will eventually be able to come back to the United States. I don't think it will be within the next 10 years necessarily, though since 2013, we have seen a big shift in U.S. support of him. 40% of people, 60% thought he was terrible, 40% thought he had done a good thing, and now those numbers are reversed a lot. He has a lot more public support. But like the public support he enjoys in countries around the world, the political leadership is still not going to treat him well. And in fact, he just said in the BBC interview he did that the Department of Justice has not offered him any kind of plea deal, even though he has expressed a willingness to go to jail.
Talk about the scrambled politics of this, because I think going into it, and certainly in the early 2000s, when you see somebody like John Ashcroft as Attorney General, who was telling people don't, raise the phantom of lost liberties to, ever say anything bad about the government, a lot of people were willing to say, okay, this is, right-wing conservatives versus left-wing peacenik Democrats. But that is not at all how it's played out.
No, I mean, so many left-wing people, when Obama was elected, suddenly became very centrist on a lot of the more controversial programs that were occurring under Bush. And people are like, well, if a Republican did that, they would have been skewered, which is true. I mean, Obama came in on day one and was like, we're ending torture, we're closing Guantanamo, we're going to be the most open and transparent administration, and has done the complete opposite on all three of those. But again, okay, well, you got rid of torture, but you instituted a drone program that I think is even more frightening, because at least if you're tortured, you can live.
Right, to tell the story.
Right, to tell the story.
Talk a little bit about, and it's a horrible situation where we're saying, torture is preferable to drone strikes, right, as a policy.
Right.
Talk about exposed facts and what you're hoping to accomplish there, and where's the best place for people to find out more information about it?
Sure. Exposed Facts is a nonprofit organization that was created to encourage whistleblowing and adversarial journalism. I am starting a new program there called the Whistleblower and Source Protection Program, because for me, I've always said that the war on whistleblowers is really a backdoor war on journalists. And just as often, whistleblowers usually are the source. Journalists appear throughout every single whistleblower indictment. And I think there is a war on journalists and a broader war on information going on in our country.
Who's going to win that war? Are you hopeful that kind of new media and new technologies, which on the one hand gives the government more ways to surveil you, but on the other way also gives these outlets for expression that wouldn't have happened even 10 years ago?
I like to be optimistic and agree with my client Edward Snowden that if Congress doesn't take care of this, that tech will. And you can see that. I mean, tech has gone ahead and created amazing encryption devices, and you can see the government's frustration with that, because now in the UK and the US and Australia, they are trying to outlaw encryption. So, and again, the judicial branch, I feel like, is finally turning on these issues and ruling that secret surveillance is unconstitutional and probably illegal. So I do see change going on in that branch of government. I'm hoping that ultimately technology and internet freedom will prevail in this struggle.
Well, we'll leave it there. I hope you're right. We've been talking with Jessalyn Radak. She is at Exposed Facts, and she's a lawyer to many whistleblowers, and hopefully more to come. Jessalyn, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you, Nick.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.
Okay, now we expect these people to, stand up and do something, but do we have enough that are awake to be able to effectively do that? I think we're getting there. I think there has to be a level of intelligence that enough people within government see what these people are doing at higher levels and realize that, hey, I'm going to get played. I think that's why we see so much of the information come out quicker than I think they would like. Definitely when you've seen what happened with Benghazi and all that. I think people are allowing things to get out a lot quicker for the reason, if we don't let it out immediately, they'll censor it. We need the truth out there. I think Clinton basically didn't have a proper chance. The administration didn't have a proper chance to react quick enough, so they use a video for their cover. Okay, let me see if I can find this article here. Maybe. Okay. This one, if it loads, yep. From the AP, appeals court says American can't sue FBI over abuse claims. A U.S. citizen who claims American officials falsely imprisoned and tortured him for several months in Africa can't sue the FBI agents involved because the conduct took place overseas during a terrorism investigation. A federal appeals court ruled Friday. The 2-1 ruling from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit acknowledged that Amir Mishal's allegations of abuse were quite troubling, but said he is without recourse to pursue claims that agents violated his constitutional rights. Matter of touching on national security and foreign policy fall within an area of executive action where courts hesitate to intrude. Absent congressional authorization, Judge Janice Rogers Brown said in upholding a lower court decision that threw out Mishal's case last year. Mishal, a New Jersey resident, said he traveled to Mogadishu, Somalia in 2006 to broaden his understanding of Islam. After violence erupted, he and other civilians fled to neighboring Kenya, where he was later arrested by Kenyan authorities and turned over to the FBI. The lawsuit, which the American Civil Liberties Union filed on Michal's behalf, claims U.S. officials sent him back to Somalia and eventually to Ethiopia, where he was imprisoned in secret for several months. He says FBI agents accused him of receiving training from Al-Qaeda and subjected him to harsh interrogations while denying him access to a lawyer, his family, or anyone else. He was released in May of 2007 with no explanation, according to the lawsuit. While law enforcement officials can be sued for violating a person's constitutional rights, Brown said that courts have been hesitant to allow such lawsuits in cases involving the military, national security, or intelligence. These concerns are heightened when the conduct takes place outside the United States, she said. The fact that Michal is a U.S. citizen does not outweigh the court's reluctance to interfere with matters of national security, Brown said. Judge Brett Kavanaugh agreed with Brown, but wrote separately to stress that it is up to Congress, not the courts, to decide whether U.S. officials can be sued for conduct in foreign countries in connection with the war against Al-Qaeda and other radical Islamic terrorist organizations. In dissent, Judge Cornelia Nina Pillard said the government had not supported its claims that allowing the lawsuit would undercut national security and diplomatic relations. When the government reaches out to punish a citizen who is abroad, the shield which the Bill of Rights and other parts of the Constitution provide to protect his life and liberty should not be stripped away just because he happens to be in another land, Pillard said. I wonder if Pillard stands with that statement when it comes to Al-Awlaki and his son. Brown and Kavanaugh are Republican appointees. Pillard was appointed by President Barack Obama. I wonder if he definitely supports that. In his statement, Michal's lawyer, Jonathan Hafetz, said he was disappointed by the ruling, which recognizes the gravity of Mr. Michal's allegations of unlawful detention and abuse, but denies him any remedy. The ACLU said Michal is considering an appeal. A Justice Department spokesman did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Government officials have argued that allowing the case to go forward could reveal sensitive information about national security threats in Africa and U.S. intelligence sources in the region. U.S. authorities have said that after interviewing Michal in Kenya, they determined he was not a threat and had not violated U.S. law. Michal was 24 when he returned home to New Jersey in 2007. And what we also see is the lack of abiding by those laws here. They already put, language into bills and other things they passed or executive orders that basically have taken those rights away. Where basically national security, like they said in there, they want to claim, well, if you're a terrorist or a suspected terrorist, they can detain you without trial or charges or anything for however long they decide. Okay. pretty interesting. Defense1.com, new material promises NSA-proof wallpaper. Your next tinfoil hat will not be made of tinfoil. A small company called Conductive Composites out of Utah has developed a flexible material, thin and tough enough for wallpaper or woven fabric that can keep electronic emissions in and electromagnetic pulses out. There are a few ways to snoop on electronic communications. You can hack into a network, or you can sniff out radio emissions. If you want to defend against the latter, you can enclose your electronic device or devices within a structure of electrically conductive, probably metallic material. That the result is something like a force field. The conductive material distributes the magnetic energy away from the target in every direction. Think of the splat you get when you hurl a tomato at a wall. These enclosures are sometimes called Faraday cages, after the 18th century British scientists who discovered electrolysis. Today, Faraday cages are all over the place. In 2013, the College of Cardinals convened to elect a new Pope. The Vatican Sistine Chapel was converted into a Faraday cage so that news of the election couldn't leak out, no matter how hard the paparazzi tried and how eager the Cardinals were to tweet the proceedings. The military also uses Faraday cages for secure communications, sensitive, compartmented information facilities, or SCIFSs, are Faraday cages. You don't need to be in one to access the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, the Defense Department's top secret internet. Conductive Composites has created a method to layer nickel on carbon to form a material that's light and moldable like plastic, yet can disperse energy like traditional metal cage. So go check that out at Defense One. With all this going on, that's something that might be interesting. Defense1.com. Okay. Moving on here. Maybe. Now, when we talk about journalism, we see, the difference between mainstream and alternative. And we wonder why, mainstream is the way they are. Well, kids that try to do good in school tend to be coerced into things. But the problem, if you do educate students, which Common Core, I think, is out there to de-educate students. But let's say you're actually trying to educate students. They become smart. Therefore, they're going to know what a real journalist is and what integrity is. And this happened at a high school where a journalism class basically was trying to write an article on the firing of a popular teacher by a new principal, which ended up leading to the firing of another teacher, the journalist teacher, and turned into something a lot bigger. But it also shows how kids are being told one thing but manipulated and doing the other. It's kind of like saying, oh, that red apple is actually purple. Well, if you just teach someone that the red apple is actually a purple apple, it doesn't matter what everybody else sees because they relate the word purple with red. So everything they see, it's not that they're colorblind. It's that that's what they've been taught. I'm going to play this short clip here.
Of kids whose rights not only have been taken away, but who have been taught by overcautious school administrators to scorn rights, to not believe in them, and to question them.
When the newspaper staff at this California high school wanted to write about the firing of a popular teacher, administrators reacted in all the wrong ways, starting with an attempt to censor the student reporters and ending with the suspension of the journalism teacher who tried to stand up for their rights.
Rights are rights, regardless of whether you exercise them in a school or whether you exercise them out in the real world.
The staffers of the award-winning high school newspaper The Matador take their roles as student journalists seriously and want to cover the stories that matter to their classmates. So it's no surprise that they began investigating after the school's principal pulled a popular first-year teacher and debate coach into his office and terminated his contract.
He didn't deserve to be fired. He hadn't done anything wrong, so we wanted to fight for him to come back.
What do we want? Andrew hired! When do we want it? Now!
Student protests formed. It was a classic student newspaper story. Popular teacher fired with no explanation.
Of course, as a newspaper, you want to report on things that have a large impact. And because Andrew Nguyen had touched so many people, they wanted to report on it because of the reaction that it caused.
It's still unclear why Nguyen was let go, and he declined to comment in this video. But he waived his right to privacy in a handwritten letter to the Matador's staff, and rumors began circulating about a personality conflict with the school's principal, Jim Schofield.
In all my previous years of going to San Gabriel High School, Mr. Schofield didn't really come into our classes very often. But that past year, having Mr. Nguyen, he was coming in and checking on him all the time, and it just didn't seem natural.
When I first started out on the whole Andrew Nguyen case, a couple of editors told me that they needed a photographer to cover a sit-in. My main interaction was with the principal, Jim Schofield. When he came out and he saw that there were students standing in solidarity and also that I was taking photographs and covering the incident, he was somewhat irate.
After a student reporter asked Principal Jim Schofield to comment on Nguyen's firing, he fired off a series of concerned emails to newspaper advisor Jennifer Kim. In this one, he orders her to kill the story and suggests a fluffy profile piece instead.
The principal's decision is very problematic. It's pretty clear that writing a story about a controversy over a teacher being fired is protected by California statute.
Ken White is a First Amendment attorney and writer for the popular law, politics, and culture blog, Pope Hat. He says free speech rights can get complicated when you're talking about public high schools, but that we can turn to the Supreme Court for some guidance.
For a long time, it was assumed that public high school students didn't have any more free speech rights than their principals wanted to give them. The key there was the case of Tinker versus Des Moines during the Vietnam War. Some students wanted to wear black armbands to protest the war. The school didn't want to let them do it. What the Tinker court said, and what was really the high watermark for student free speech rights, was that students have the right to express themselves as long as it does not disrupt the educational environment. Ever since Tinker, there's been a steady march of school administrators arguing that speech causes disruption, and the Supreme Court, for the most part, going along with them. In the Hazelwood case, what the Supreme Court said was it didn't really matter whether or not the speech in a student newspaper met the Tinker test, whether it caused actual disruption or could be expected to. The school paper, if it was controlled by the school and regulated by the school, was really the school's speech. And the school didn't have to be a platform for speech it didn't like, so that reasonable restrictions on what goes into the paper are going to be upheld.
While the Supreme Court retreated on student speech rights, California marched forward and strengthened them.
What the California statute does is takes the protection further. You can write things in the paper and the school can't punish you for it unless they're actual incitement to disruption. Now in San Gabriel, you had a paper that wanted to talk about the controversy over a popular teacher being fired. The principal's initial excuse was that they couldn't publish it because the teacher has privacy rights. What the students were doing was reporting. They were not purporting to make an official statement on behalf of the school. They were doing what a student reporter should do, which is to ask why, to ask people how they feel about it, and to write what they find out.
The staff of the Matador knew their rights and pushed back, enlisting the help of the ACLU and the Student Press Law Center. They began showing up at school board meetings, raising hell and demanding answers.
Does not collaborate. Instead, I found that the district bullies, harasses, and retaliates.
I've always been an adamant believer of standing up for what you believe in, especially in the face of adversity. And with what's happened with the school, especially at the Alhambra Unified School District, telling us, you can't do this when, in fact, we are, protected, it's kind of reaffirmed my belief. And it's also taught me to be a little bit more skeptical about authority in a way.
Finally, the principal relented and allowed publication. But this ordeal was far from over. Newspaper advisor Jennifer Kim also oversaw the publication of the yearbook. And during summer yearbook camp, she had a run-in with the new principal after she allegedly tried to influence the content of their publication.
To a lot of people, it kind of looks like this is retaliation for the Matador's coverage during the summer.
If this teacher said to his or her superiors, I think you're breaking the law, then that is potentially illegal retaliation.
School board officials and administrators declined requests for comment. But every month, students continue showing up at board meetings and badgering district officials about their conduct.
One thing that troubles me about this is that the principal and the school are not only disciplining kids, not only regulating their conduct, but they're modeling. They're teaching them values. And it bothers me when people like principals and teachers model and teach anti-speech values.
Go to Reason and check that clip out and read more on it. And you know what? Journalism at all levels, whether it be the high school level or mainstream, alternative media, new media, whatever you want to call it, we're being censored at some point. We know search engines. We know social media platforms. At all levels, we tend to get censored to some extent. Now, when we look at the progress alternative media has made, we've made really big strides, but we've also had quite a few setbacks because of the censoring or the a lot of people have had ads pulled off their websites or their YouTube accounts because of their content. We've had Eric Schmidt come out and talk about how they should, control the content that people are shown to prevent anything that might incite violence. Well, that's kind of a broad term because the truth can incite violence. Definitely when so much is withheld or called conspiracy theories. Extreme truths in a lot of situations can potentially incite violence. When people's wealth, people's freedom, people's safety, everything's been taken away from them, and the proof comes out of the manipulation and the lies, where they're not going to have any second thoughts of, did I retaliate against a innocent person? And I think that even though we see government try to control the internet, control every aspect of information, we always have people that create alternatives, new ideas that further free us. Sometimes things that are created are more of a distraction. But one thing we also see is people that are trying to expose the truth, trying to expand people's minds, always tend to be able to find ways to use it. There's people out there that they go, I like video games. I'll play online video games, and I'll play Alex Jones, or I'll play, whether it be UCY.TV in the background. Now, I know most people hate that crap if they're video gamers, but, if there's a way for you to get people to listen and tune into something that breaks them from that brainwashing, that is another, stick in the wheel of the system, that their gears aren't working properly anymore to sustain their power. We're kind of getting towards the end here. Got about 16 more minutes. Let me see how long that one clip I had queued up was here. Might not be able to play it if it's anything more than 5 minutes, I think. Yeah, I think we're tinkering there with not enough time to play this clip. Now, go check it out, though. It's U.S. gives up against ISIS, makes you the new enemy. And it's out of We Are Change. And more, I think people are starting to feel like they are becoming the enemy. That they are now the ones that have to worry about what the government's going to do. And I think there's also a danger to that. I think there's a danger that because then it kind of also feeds into If the government's at war with the others, they can't be at war with us. And that's dangerous in itself. I want to share one that came out of liberty.news. Texas farmer fought the law, and guess who won? More than 30 years ago, the U.S. Bureau of Land Management took away a Texas farmer's land based on a ruling by an Oklahoma judge who believed that the land, in fact, belonged to the federal government. What's an Oklahoma judge doing meddling in Texas land rights, you wonder? Well, Tommy Henderson's land was part of about 90,000 disputed acres that has been the subject of boundary debate since 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. The federal government argued that some of the land was publicly held, but landholders like Henderson had always used their state deeds and tax documents which show the land is rightfully theirs. Government or Texas politicians from then Attorney General Greg Abbott to then Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst have consistently been very outspoken against the BLM. Abbott once said that the federal government was trying to use its authority to swoop in and take land that has been owned and cultivated by Texas landowners for generations. At one point, even former Governor Rick Perry chimed in on the issue, remarking that the federal government already owns too much land. Texas became a battleground again. It's not surprising that Texas has become the battleground for a land rights dispute like this one. Texas has always been a very independent, liberty-minded state, and today, more than ever, secession movements are taken seriously here. Perry also sparked controversy during a political rally where Texas nationalists brought up the topic of secession, and he responded by saying, if Washington continues to thumb their nose at the American people, who knows what could come out of that. In fact, a lot could come out of that, and perhaps that is why the federal government finally gave back to Henderson the land that rightfully belongs to him. In September 2015, independent media outlets reported widely on the land's homecoming. The government turned the land, which had been in his family since 1904, back over to him, and now he hopes his example will prove advantageous for other Red River landowners who are currently pushing back against BLM efforts to take their property, 90,000 of which are in play. However, whether or not other landowners get their property back remains to be seen. August 2015, Breitbart reported Henderson explained he never felt his battle was with the local BLM staff and management. Rather, he said the obstacles always came from Washington, D.C. Well, those obstacles couldn't come if local BLM would just not follow orders blindly. The facts of law are different in Henderson's case from the other landowners because he lost his land through a court decision that even BLM officials told him was flawed. They are trying to keep their land. I was trying to get mine back, he said. Now that the process for the color of title process to work properly, it should be easier on everyone else. The BLM story was full of amazing twists and turns. It had a happy ending overall, but the federal government hadn't wised up when it did. The farmers were ready with their pitchforks and shotguns. During the Bundy Ranch standoff in April 2014, a member of the state militia said that they were ready to use deadly force to defend Clive Bundy's family ranch from an invasion by the BLM. Tensions ran high, and many feared that the problem was not going to be resolved peacefully. Fortunately, the standoff ended without any shots fired, as Natural News reported. Lawmakers all over the country decried the situation and criticized the BLM for using paramilitary units to intimidate law-abiding American citizens. Of course, the federal government should never take away anyone's land, but doing so in Texas is a risky proposition. We can only hope that no Texas rancher or Texas cow, for that matter, will be harmed by the BLM or any other federal entity. And again, that was Liberty.News. Now, we are living in a time where things like this are becoming more every year, couple times a year type things, where we see oath keepers or militia having to stand up for miners, ranchers, and just property owners. And again, like I said, if we don't do this a peaceful way, you're talking to a heritage that there's still a lot of people in America that have that, hell with you type attitude, you leave me the hell alone type. Even if they don't understand a philosophy, there's a long-standing heritage of, leave me the hell alone type. Definitely down south. Because of the Civil War, there's kind of a heritage of being disenfranchised, even a little bit deeper with the federal government than maybe the North. But, you still see it everywhere. There's quite a few libertarian factions here in Indiana, but, they're, of course, you have things like Keene, New Hampshire, and the whole Free State Project up in New Hampshire, and other places like Texas, where even if they're not libertarian, they're the leave me the hell alone type people. They're unknowingly got libertarian tendencies, even though they also have status type tendencies. There's a couple things I did not get to tonight. There's one out of conservative HQ.com, and it's titled "Paul Ryan arrogantly demands an end to constitutional government." I guess I got a little time I can go over this one, but also go to Reason. Reason's got quite a few articles up that you should read. Go check them out. Also, Facebook.com/Anti-Tyranny News. I post a lot of stuff up there. This one again, conservativehq.com. Paul Ryan arrogantly demands an end to constitutional government. In bizarre act and arrogance unprecedented in American political history, establishment Republican Paul Ryan has spelled out the terms under which he will accept the third highest office in our constitutional republic, and they amount to nothing less than the destruction of democratic government in America. What Ryan announced to the House Republican Conference last night was a set of conditions under which he would accept the Speaker gavel that amounts to discarding any pretense that the House of Representatives is the people's house, as in we the people, to make it simple, Paul's house. According to multiple media reports, Ryan told a private evening meeting of House Republicans that he would be willing to step into the Speaker's role, ending weeks of GOP leadership turmoil as long as conservatives immediately abandon their demands for conservative reforms that would lead to an end to government by a small cabal of leadership members and staff, and unconditionally committed to support him and his agenda. Ryan said of his willingness to stand for Speaker, "I hope it doesn't sound conditional, but it is," he said. According to members inside the room, he paused after saying the word conditional. Members present have said for effect. In remarks reported by the Washington Post, Mike DeBonis and Robert Costa, Ryan laid out his vision for moving the House GOP from being an opposition party to being a proposition party, and set terms under which he would assume the Speaker's post. But is this not typical of government? Give up your rights, your freedoms, and just give me the power before I'll take this position. I don't want anybody in that position. I don't think anybody's competent of governing over other people, okay? No, we don't give up, but that's also why if we're going to try to do this peaceful way, we have to make sure that people awaken to this crap. Putting another Boehner 2.0, another establishment person at the helm of a party that is pissed off over establishment Republicans. And, you know, I think the Tea Party is flawed in so many ways. They call themselves libertarians when they're not, more constitutionalists. But they really have flawed views on a lot of things, but they are at least a step in the right direction, which we just continue the status quo. And you wonder why we have things like what happened with Clive and Bundy, the Texas ranchers that are battling around the Red River, the miners, and, you know, the whole police state building up because we keep allowing this to happen. There should be turmoil going on in the Republican Party. One that, you know, people would go along with Paul Ryan being the Speaker. Should be up in turmoil that Jeb Bush would be up there, that Rubio would be up there, that these establishment people would be up there. They would question why Ted Cruz, Rand Paul were so high up in the polls, and all of a sudden this outsider comes in and they disappear off the polls. And the two outsiders, Ben Carson and Donald Trump, are leading in the polls, and the establishment GOP doesn't like that. I say BS, they do. I say BS that he was a card that they were willing to play. I say BS because anytime that Ron Paul got close to maybe turning the tables on the nomination process, we heard things about Donald Trump thinking about running. Then we heard that for, you know, a month until he finally said no. And then by then, they stopped showing Ron Paul on anything. I think it's just BS. But, you know, make up your mind. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV for all the great broadcasts coming up after this.